Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. When you think of medieval life, you might imagine jousting nights, grand feasts, and merry fairs. But for the average peasant, winter was less about merriment and more about one terrifying question. How do we not die tonight? It wasn't just a season. It was a test of endurance that came around every year, like an especially cruel teacher who never gave second chances. For months, the sun barely rose. The wind didn't whistle, it screamed. And the cold, it wasn't just uncomfortable. It was deadly. Frostbite, hypothermia, and freezing to death weren't abstract risks. They were daily possibilities. Every morning you woke up still breathing was considered a minor miracle, worth celebrating maybe with a slightly less frozen turnip for breakfast. Surviving a medieval winter wasn't about comfort. It was about gritting your teeth, piling on every scrap of cloth, huddling with your livestock, and praying you didn't wake up with icicles hanging from your eyelashes. And the real adventure? It started the moment your feet hit the floor. Because the floor was the enemy. Most homes didn't have wooden floors. They didn't even have stone. They had dirt. Packed earth, maybe covered in straw or old rushes if you were lucky. But that was it. You were sleeping one insulted back away from the frozen ground. And that cold? It didn't just sit there. It crawled up through the straw like an invisible predator, sucking the warmth right out of your bones. So people got creative. They stuffed walls with moss. They layered their mattresses with hay. Some even mixed manure into the mud walls, because when it dried, it trapped heat like nature's insulation. Every gap was sealed. Every crack was hunted down like a traitor in the night. But none of it mattered if the fire died. Keeping the fire alive wasn't just a nice idea. It was mandatory. Letting it go out at night was like hanging a welcome sign for the cold and death. And reigniting a fire in winter? That wasn't as easy as striking a match. Matches didn't exist. Lighters? Don't make me laugh. You had flint, steel, kindling, and a prayer. Imagine doing that in the dark, half asleep, fingers numb. Wind howling like wolves outside your paper-thin walls. One spark. That's all you needed, but coaxing it to life with frozen hands. That was a battle all its own. Everyone had a role. Someone stoked the flames. Someone guarded the embers. Someone added peat, sticks, or, if they were very lucky, a precious piece of dry wood. It was a constant war. And if you woke up to even a single glowing ember, that was your victory. That was enough to face another day. But fire wasn't the only heat source. In medieval times, the phrase "the more the merrier" wasn't about parties. It was a survival tactic. When the wind screamed through every crack, there was one surefire source of warmth: each other. Sleeping cheek to cheek with your entire family, normal. Sharing a blanket with your neighbor, their goat, and a very confused goose, also normal. Forget personal space. This was about survival. Babies and the elderly, most vulnerable to the cold, were tucked into the center, treated like living hot water bottles. And yes, it got weird. Snoring uncles, smelly sheep. Arguments over blanket theft. But over time, this closeness became something more. It became bonding. Long nights led to storytelling, singing, whispered secrets, and songs passed down for generations. So next time your dog hogs the bed or your sibling steals your blanket, remember, at least you're not fighting for elbow room between a snoring cousin and a barnyard duck. Now, about clothes. Peasants weren't flipping through fashion magazines. They were layering like they were preparing for war against the Grim Reaper himself. If you owned it, you wore it. All at once. First, a scratchy linen undertunic, probably not washed since Easter. Over that, a thick woolen tunic. Then another, if you had it. Leggings that sagged at the knees. A rough cloak. And if you were really lucky, a patched-up sheepskin thrown on like a trophy. Congratulations. You were now a walking insulation unit. But even that wasn't enough. So they adapted their bodies. They learned to breathe differently. Instead of gulping cold air like they'd just run a marathon, they kept their breaths shallow, slow, and most importantly through the nose. Why? To warm the air before it hit their lungs. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than coughing up lung fragments by February. And if you did take a big mouthful of freezing air, congrats. You just bought yourself a week of hacking up what felt like your soul treated with hot onion tea and grandma's firm prayers. Food was another weapon. They ate heavy, fatty meals before bed. Stews loaded with lard, bread soaked in grease, whatever meat they had left. Fat burns slower than protein. So a belly full of greasy turnips wasn't just dinner, it was a slow-release heater. Parents made sure even the pickiest kids ate. Didn't like turnips? Too bad. You ate them, or you shivered through the night regretting your life choices. Harsh, yes, but effective. Of course, eating a ton before bed came with risks. Digestion generates heat, but also gas. And in a room full of 15 people, livestock, and limited ventilation, let's just say the air wasn't always pleasant. But food wasn't just fuel. It was shared. When supplies ran low, villages pooled what little they had. A neighbor would bring their last salted meat. Another, a handful of grain. A third, dried vegetables so old they looked like fossils. It was grim charity. No one had much. But a few communal meals could be the difference between staggering into spring or not. Even children understood the stakes. They delivered wood, shared embers and clay pots to keep neighbors warm, ran messages when someone fell ill. No one was too small or too tired when winter came knocking. Sure, medieval villages weren't all sunshine and hugs. Feuds happened. Disputes over land, goats, or who borrowed whose cooking pot never really went away. But when the nights turned deadly cold, old grudges were often quietly set aside. Because they lived by one unspoken rule: no one beats winter alone. And when the fire dimmed and the cold pressed in from all sides, they turned to something deeper: faith. It wasn't just a Sunday thing. It was woven into every frozen breath. Before crawling under layers of straw and scratchy wool, families knelt together, praying the roof would hold, the fire wouldn't die, and their toes would still be attached by morning. Saints weren't distant figures. They were winter's frontline defense. People sprinkled holy water near the hearth, hoping it would keep evil spirits and drafts away. Others marked doorways with blessed chalk after feast days, pleading for warmth and luck to find their way inside. Candles played a role, too. Special vigil candles, blessed by the priest or the village's most pious elder, were sometimes kept burning all night. a flickering plea against the darkness clawing at the walls. And no serious prayer session was complete without a promise. Dear Lord, if you get us through this night, I swear I'll be kinder to my neighbor, even the one who keeps stealing our turnips. Faith wasn't abstract comfort. It was a daily, urgent conversation. They weren't asking for luxury, just survival. A little heat, a little food, one more day. It was raw hope whispered into smoky rafters, tangled in breathless prayers, tucked under itchy blankets. They didn't have the luxury of assuming they'd survive until spring. But what they did have, and what they left behind, was the blueprint for resilience. Every hay-stuffed mattress, every hand-banked fire, every moss-crammed wall gap. These were testaments to human creativity under pressure. Faced with impossible odds, they didn't collapse. They adapted. They learned from the land, from each other, and from the bitter lessons of every brutal winter. Their communities weren't built on shared land. They were built on shared survival. They watched over the sick, pooled resources, trusted that helping a freezing neighbor today meant someone might help them tomorrow. Their faith, too, was a kind of endurance, woven into daily life, not just out of fear, but out of hope. Fragile, stubborn hope that tomorrow might be a little warmer, that after 100 dark nights, spring would come again, that life would find a way to push through the frozen ground. And somehow it did. Because of their sacrifices, because of their unglamorous victories, surviving one more night, one more storm, future generations thrived. Bit by frozen bit, they pushed humanity forward. Enduring winters, their ancestors could barely survive until warmth and comfort became common expectations, not distant dreams. Their blood, sweat, and ingenuity are stitched invisibly into the lives we live now. Every cozy blanket, every warm house, every lazy winter evening spent sipping tea under soft lights. All of it is the end result of countless medieval peasants who refused to give in to the cold. So the next time the wind howls outside your double-paned window, maybe spare a thought for them. The nameless, fearless ones who turned shivering survival into a living legacy. One ember, one breath, one stubborn heartbeat at a time. Now, quick question before we go. Did you know that a civilization in ancient Peru Carol thrived 5,000 years ago without war, without weapons, and without kings? They built pyramids, mapped the stars, and lived in harmony with the desert. A story for another night. Or what about Anne Boleyn, how her fight for power changed England forever? That one's chilling in a whole different way. Let me know in the comments which story you want next. And while you're down there, tell me, where are you watching from? What's the weather like outside your window? If you're warm, safe, and listening to this from a cozy room, consider this video a quiet thank you to those who came before us and made this kind of comfort possible. Until next time, stay warm. And remember, even in the coldest dark, a single spark can start a revolution. Good night.